All right, welcome back to my channel, Family Tech, where I give all the tech tips, news, and information you didn't even know you needed. So today, my guest, I'm super excited. I have Dr. Monica Burns, and she is a education tech expert. And I'm super excited because my kids are going back to school next week. So I know there's a lot of people going back to school already. I know a few of my friends, their schools have already started. So this is perfectly timed. I'm so excited to talk about this because a lot of parents have a lot of anxiety and everything about technology. But Monica, will you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what you do?
Absolutely. So I am so excited to be here with you today for this conversation. I'm a former New York City public school teacher. I'm still based on the East Coast, and I write and talk and present about all things ed tech. So I have my blog, classtechtips.com, my podcast, the Easy Ed Tech podcast, and share a lot on social too. So really curating resources for K-12 educators, of course, with families in mind too. So I share a lot of resources that families might want to tap into or take a look at, or even just think about what may be happening in their child's classroom or what kind of extensions they want to provide at home.
Yeah, and your website is linked right in the description below. So anybody who wants to go check out her stuff, she's got awesome books, podcast, everything. So definitely go check her out. Um, tons of information and resources for sure. um, so let's just dig right into like what kind of technology are teachers implementing in the classroom these days? I mean, probably a lot.
Yeah, and it's a big variety in different parts of the country, in different schools, in different districts. A school that might be down the block from another school, there can be a lot of variety in what that looks like too. So now, after so much remote learning and students learning from home over the past few years, many schools have more access to technology than they did before. So the conversation or the answer to that question, even 3 years ago, would be very different than it is right now. So, one of the big pieces of that is that more schools have a Chromebook or an iPad or a MacBook or some sort of device that every student has access to over the course of the day. And that's more and more true at all grade levels, than it would have been in the past. So the way technology is being used in the classroom is for assessment, for consumption, so reading, listening, viewing, for creating, making products of learning that they can synthesize everything they've learned from a variety of sources and then make something great that they can share with their classmates or their families or the world, right? Depending on how sharing is set up. So I usually think of things in those three core categories, and not in any hierarchy, right? But our assessment, consumption, creation. But there's other things that may be taking place too, depending on the area within which students are learning. So, if they are in a science classroom doing a lot of labs, they might be collecting a lot of data, right, using that device. They may be exploring virtual reality experiences as part of a career tech program. So, a lot of variety on top of some of the core ways or the more common ways that you might see technology being used.
Yeah, and you said something, and I'm gonna go off of the questions I've already sent you, so I apologize for putting you on the spot a little bit. But what kind of changes have happened because of the pandemic? Like, I know for my kids, they were thrown into this like online schooling, and teachers were fumbling along. Like, kind of what changes did that kind of come about?
Yeah, so just the use of technology in terms of, I would say, the quantity. So, not necessarily a quality increase, right? But a quantity of terms of how many people were thinking about ways, right, to use technology in a classroom environment. So, you had a lot of people who had a pretty strong foundation. Maybe they were using a learning management system already to distribute resources to students in a classroom, right? So, when they made a shift to learning at home, it was pretty, it was a little simpler for them to say, okay, well, where we already post this, even though last week we didn't think we'd be learning from home. Like, we've built these routines for 6 months now, right? And so
Yeah.
you know that this is where you submit your work, whether we're all sitting next to each other or not. So some of those pieces were just amplified. In other situations, it was really building those foundations, right? Or laying that foundation for the first time in the spring of 2020 and having that hub to say, this is where we go, this is where we meet, this is what it looks like for us to work all together at the same time on a video call live or asynchronously, just like we might in a station rotation, right? In a classroom, even though we might not have called it that before. So, some of the big changes I would say is just the jumps in terms of vocabulary around what it can look like. The conversations I've had with educators at all levels and backgrounds, has changed in terms of, the questions people are asking now are really rooted in a lot more experience that they've had. The context that they have for conversations on technology integration has changed greatly, this year. And I would imagine too, just based on my conversations and work with schools going into this upcoming school year, there is a little bit of that pushback to say, like, we want to make sure that we are not overdoing it, that we have a balance, right? Some, areas, it may be tempting to kind of walk away from technology integration, say, well, we don't need that anymore, right? Because we kind of
Oh, yeah.
oversaturated what that looks like.
Right.
And I totally understand that, right? Like if we eat, too many of anything over the course of the week, like I never want to see that at least for another month or so, right? Like
Right.
how delicious that was, like I'm done with this for, a little while, right? So
Yeah.
I totally get that. And I know so much of my work is really rooted in this idea of balance and finding, when these moments happen where we can really add a lot of value, right? There's a big benefit to bringing in technology. And other times where, we might have done something because we needed to, right? Because we were learning at a distance. But now if we're sitting next to each other, like I would much rather have you turn and talk to the person next to you, right? To jump into a
Right.
conversation around a table than just post something online for the sake of doing it, right? Like, so we
Right.
can have that balance between these different types of pieces. And, that's where I've seen some change happen, right? As we're moving into this new school year and finishing up the past school year.
Yeah, and so that actually kind of leads into this next question I have because I think parents got really nervous about like, if their school district didn't handle that transition very well, like, oh my gosh, technology is a disaster in the classroom, or, they're
Mhm,
nervous about their kids getting addicted to different technology. So
mhm.
I know there's a lot of parents that are just really leery about utilizing technology in the classroom. And what do you want these parents to understand?
So I think there's a big difference between, quality and quantity of experiences, right? And this comes up a lot when people ask me questions about screen time, right? Or what's
Right.
appropriate screen time, right? So there's absolutely, American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations for what screen time looks like, especially for youngest learners or students who are, under the age of 5, right? Co-viewing experiences, right? How to use technology in an appropriate way for that age group. When it comes to in the classroom, there's just so many different things that can happen when we talk about what it looks like to use technology. So, one of the things I would suggest kind of thinking about or observing or asking questions around, are what those experiences look like. Are we using adaptive learning software all day to test students on, math skills, right? Like that might not be something we need to spend a huge amount of time on, but there are benefits to having students in a platform that's going to be responsive, that's going to gather some formative assessment data that their teachers can use to have more strategic interventions, right? So there's a balance between how much of that time we need to gather that information and offer an intervention for students. When we're thinking about using technology in high quality ways, yes, there's the access, right? I can much easier, it's much easier for me to access a great current events article to share with students or an engaging ebook that's differentiated when I click a button and now everyone can read it independently, right? So, there's a
Right.
lot to be said about the power of the consumption that takes place when we're keeping access, finding high interest resources, differentiating resources for students. So if that's part of the conversation, right? Like if that's what what's happening alongside the we're using digital tools to locate resources, and that's a really high quality use of technology, right? Everyone pulling up the same PDF, right, might not be right a high quality use, but there could be some ease and efficiency there that's worth acknowledging too, right? So there's a lot to talk about when it comes to those building high quality experiences. So for families that are, thinking about, I'm concerned or I'm a little, cautious here about what's, happening, I would say look through those lens of, what are we doing that we couldn't do before? And sometimes it's not obvious on the surface, and you just see kids in front of computers and you really want to have a conversation, say like, oh, I didn't realize kids are, interviewing an expert or researching this topic and making infographics or getting ready to record a podcast episode. Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that might happen that we just don't see unless we're, asking questions. And, when we come in to ask questions, like really coming from a place of, curiosity, right? Tell me more about this, right? As opposed to, that, I think it's important to voice a concern, of course, like I'm coming from a place where I'm worried about this, but, we can have that conversation with more of the curiosity, tell me more type of mindset too.
Yeah, and so what it sounds like is, parents generally see screen time and technology as a consumption tool. With their
Mhm.
kids, they see them on YouTube, they see them,
Right.
just consuming content. And what you're saying is like really look into like what exactly they're doing with that technology because they're doing things that they could not have done before.
Yeah, and in many cases, right? In many cases, and that's not true of right all situations, right?
Sure.
Sometimes there is that, right? Like, plug it in and play type of mentality. But I
Right.
don't know that that is, what we really want to come into a conversation, thinking more, thinking about. Like we may see more consumption happening at home, but if that ratio, may not mirror the same thing when students are at school. And it's also a neat opportunity for families to be reflective to say, can we do some co-viewing at home? Like, are we sitting side by side, talking about what's happening on the screen, or tell me more about this? Or, are we modeling a lot of consumption behavior ourselves in a home
Right.
environment? And then it becomes the norm of how technology is used, right? Very easier said than done, right? It's
Yeah, for sure. And and I have found too, like with my own kids, they want to share what they're doing on the
Mhm.
computer. Like, my son will be building these amazing Minecraft worlds and he's like, "Mom, come take a look at like everything that I've built." And an hour later and I'm sitting there, but like it's important because like they are really proud of what they've created and what they've shared.
Absolutely. And, it's one of those things where it can be hard to start a conversation if we feel like we're coming in from like a deficit. Like, I didn't have this experience. I don't know
Right.
what's happening. Like, where do I even start a conversation? Especially if
Yeah.
you have, multi generational families, right? Even watching this today to say, like, this was not 20 years ago for me. This was 60 years ago that I was this
Right.
age, right? Like, how am I
Yeah.
supposed to talk about this with, my grandchild or my niece or nephew? And I think coming in with the like, tell me more about this, right? Something really broad, or I've never seen this before. Can you tell me how this works, right?
Right.
Or I can tell that you really love this. I would love to know more about this too, right? And kind of leaning into what can also be a co-learning experience, right? Like, don't just show me how to fix this thing that's broken on my computer, right? Um, right? Or whatever I assume, right, that 16-year-old can do for me, right? But can
Right.
you take me through this process, or like tell me how you figured this out? Like, how do you even know this, right? And I think
Right.
that can really change the conversations with families to, help everyone see that there's, that genuine interest in what's happening in a screen. And it can also, allow students to feel more comfortable to say like, I saw this thing and I don't think it's okay, right? Like,
Right.
if you
Yeah.
know that you're up for those tech conversations, they might feel a little bit better coming to you when something that's not safe is happening.
Yeah, and I'm a strong proponent of that, like, conversations with your kids about what they're seeing online. I always tell them, as soon as you see something like, even from a super young age, like 2, 3, I'm like, "If you see naked mommies and daddies, come and tell
Mhm,
me,"
mhm,
and so those conversations, they become easier as you continue to have them,
mhm.
because then
Yeah,
they're just like, they're not ashamed, like, oh, I came across this, I must have been doing something bad. You're like, well, that happens sometimes. So let's
Right.
figure out how to fix it.
Or I won't be able to use the iPad next time, right? Or any of those kind of
Right.
things, right? That they feel like the consequence is about them as opposed to having like a this is what we do and we see this conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for bringing that up. That's one of my huge like platforms for sure. So speaking of like safe and everything, a lot of schools are now issuing Chromebooks to kids at the
Mhm.
school, and that's true for my kids' school. The whole district is doing one-to-one Chromebooks this year. So what kind of protections are typically in place on these devices, and how can parents like help protect them even further?
So I will say that the conversation around data privacy and all of those pieces has become much stronger, in the past 3, 5 years. So that means that at a district level, people are asking better questions when they're vetting products to bring in, everything from the hardware to the software. And it's more of an expectation than a nice thing to have, like it might have been in the past. So for families who are curious about all of those pieces, I would go straight to whatever's kind of high on the list in your particular area. Maybe it's at the district level, maybe it's a school based decision, and ask them and say, right, what went into this process, or what is our district's data privacy plan, right? What is it that we are going to think about, and what are we going to bring into, like, what are you thinking about when you make these decisions, and all of that sort of piece, right? So those are the kind of things I would go out and look for, right? Is who's making the decision in the community, and just ask them for what that plan is for data privacy, for student privacy. It may be labeled in different ways. And that should be something that is pretty on the table, right? That might have come up in a board meeting. It might be a policy that you can find on a district website too, right? That talks about some of those pieces. So when it comes to families vetting different tools or looking at tools that kids are bringing home, a quick look on a website for that piece of software, for that app, or that application. One thing you want to look for here in the US is COPPA compliance, so COPPA. So if you are
Online
on an yeah,
Privacy and Protection Act. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So if you're on an ed tech tools website and you don't see that anywhere, that would, immediately say to me like, ooh, like either they haven't thought about this, or
Right.
they've thought about this and it's not part of what they do, or maybe there's just a gap in their communication and they don't realize how important it is. Like they know how it's important, but they don't know how important it is to me, and they haven't put this out on their website. So that's something to look for just kind of as a first pass. If you're looking at tools that are based outside of the US or are very popular in the EU, GDPR compliance is not exactly right. It's not
Right.
exactly the one that I would compare, name to name, but it's also going to give
For sure.
you a nice understanding of whether or not data privacy is important to that organization. So those are the kind of
Right.
things that I would look for, depending on the age of your child and what kind of things that they're doing in online spaces. If they have their own personal email, like if you as a family have decided that that's okay for them to have, I would come into the process of reminding them like, or is this logged into your school one, or double check your Gmail, right? And kind of
Right.
building those behaviors. Even something as that might seem silly, like telling a story of a mistake you made, like, oh, I forgot I was logged into my work email when I downloaded this podcast, right? Like
Right.
something low,
Yeah.
now it's going to be hard for me to find, right? Like something low stakes like that, just like building those conversations when you're in the car on the way to school, or commuting on the train, or sitting in the doctor's office, like just being transparent about your own interactions and navigating like a work, a school, a personal email, I think can help just kids have that like, oh, moment when they're making a decision, or, oh, this is just like what, my stepdad said earlier this week, right? Or however that looks, right? I think that can
Right.
be helpful too.
Yeah, and I love what you said here, and I've said this, before exactly regarding Chromebooks,
Mhm.
school issued Chromebooks, to liken it to a business issued device. So if I'm getting a
Oh,
device
yeah.
from my company, I'm not going to be searching up inappropriate content on that device, because this device is owned by the company, and
Mhm.
anything that I do on that is the property of the company.
Oh, yeah.
And so having them kind of correlate that with the school issued Chromebook, I think is super helpful, because then they say, okay, anything I do on this Chromebook, really the school can see and I could get in trouble or whatever. So
Mhm.
I need to just do schoolwork on the school issued Chromebook. And then any, like my own devices, I can do whatever I want on my own devices. But for the school issued Chromebook, I'm just doing schoolwork.
Absolutely. And, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And one thing that I've heard people say before that I often repeat or think about in my own practice, and this is much more adult focused, and I'll make the student comparison in a moment. But, this idea of saying, I don't want to send an email that I'm not comfortable reading aloud in a deposition, right? Like in any
Right.
part of my life. And that sounds like pretty aggressive, right? But like,
No, it's true.
you really want to stand by all the things that you do. And I heard, I was interviewing for my podcast. I have a guest coming up soon, Catherine Perlman, on the podcast, and we talked about a lot of things, right, related to students and digital citizenship and all that. And her spin on it was, would you be comfortable reading this at the loudspeaker at your school, right? And I
Right.
was like, I love that, right? That's always like my like gut check, right? Like, am I proud of this this email, or
Yeah.
like maybe I shouldn't send this, or something, even a funny text message or something. And I think that's a great way for kids to think about it. Like, if your computer was plugged into the projector in this classroom, would you be comfortable with everyone seeing what's on it, right? Or is that comment that you made, right, to a friend in a Google Doc thinking that you're being funny, but maybe it's not funny if we read it out of context, right? Would you be
Right.
comfortable reading that aloud on the loudspeaker? And I don't mean to plug that, along with any sort of like shame or embarrassment or punishment.
Sure.
By no means do I think that anyone should be asked to do that as a way
Right.
to be
Right.
punitive, right? So without a doubt, but just that like internal, like, would I stand by this type of piece, and that comes back to, am I going to do something on a school device that may not feel like it's school facing, or I wouldn't be comfortable with everyone, doing it. Yeah.
That's such a great analogy. I love that so much. I just have a quick side personal story
Yeah.
about that. Obviously, I went to junior high and high school in the dark ages before there were phones and before there were even
Mhm.
pagers really. And so we passed like, actual notes
Right.
to each other. And I wrote a note to my friend that said, he will be mine. Oh yes, he will be mine. Just kind of quote that Wayne's World. And the teacher did read that out loud in front of the class. The guy that I was talking about was in that class. Like, but that's exactly right. Like anything that I'm writing now, they have devices they
Yeah.
can do this on. But yeah, if you're not comfortable with it being read in front of the class or on the loudspeaker at school, then maybe you shouldn't be doing that, especially on a school issued device.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I just, I think that sort of, all of the things that might be like pain points, right? Or that we worry about, yes, there is definitely some amplification when we're using these different devices, but some of it is really rooted in, experiences that we can relate to, even if we weren't using, right, digital tools in our own schooling experience.
Right, exactly. I love that. So, around that topic, are there any red flags parents should be aware of regarding technology use of teachers?
I mean, I'm thinking about like what they might be observing or they might be seeing. Something that I don't know if it's a red flag as much as something that I would be mindful of in your observations, and giving that feedback to a teacher or to a school. And this is something that has really worked itself out in many environments over the past few years. But one of the big pain points for families, I don't know if you experienced this, during a shift to remote learning, was that many teachers were never given instructions on what types of communication tools to use with families. So when the
Right.
transition happened, you might be in a school where you have 30 kids in the same building, not even like at different parts of a district, but in the same building, and their teacher was giving updates like with a different service, and now you're getting all these different messaging services from all these different places, right? And really hard to keep track. And so in both of those cases, everyone has the best intentions, right? A
Right.
teacher wants to keep families, up to date. Families want to stay up to date, but it just becomes really noisy. So I would say one thing that you can look out for and that you may want to, talk to a teacher about is like if you have a school and you're all using the same system for updates, reminders, and communications, but you have a teacher that's using something else, right? You might want to come to them and say, like, I'm really motivated, right, to stay in touch, but it's really hard for me to use another system, right? Like, can we, is
Right.
there a way for you to use the school based one? I know it might not be like the best, and I love this other one that you've been doing. Like, I love how friendly
Mm.
it is, but that what really comes out ahead here is that I need to just get this information, right? And so, when I
Yeah.
talk to teachers about this, I'll sometimes use the phrase like embrace your place. Like you might love this other thing, and I agree with you, right? Like the features
Right.
are above and beyond. But if your district has chosen this one thing, like embracing that is going to be good for everyone involved. Everyone's going to be more successful, even if for you there might be a little bit of a learning curve, or even if we are, tossing aside some of the great features of this other tool, in the long run, it can make a big difference.
Yeah, that I love that because that's not something I, generally think of, but okay, my school always uses email to communicate. This specific teacher is trying to use something else.
Mhm.
That's where you would be like, "Well, maybe we should just try and encourage them to use the actual, like, school
Yeah.
issued section." So, I
Yeah,
love
and that
that.
problem doesn't come up if people don't have great intentions, right? Like,
Right.
that wouldn't be a problem if nobody wants to share information or get information, right? So it's like a nice
Right.
problem to have, but it is something that, if we're committed to, being in communication, being able to connect, like we really want to remove those barriers for families as much as possible.
Yeah, for sure. So, how can parents better support tech use in the classroom?
Yeah. So, one big thing I would, we talked already about asking questions and being informed, all of those pieces, is I would ask for recommendations. And you may have some teachers who are really ready for answering those questions or might need a minute to think on it. And that could be a teacher, or it could also be a media specialist or someone else who's a support staff in a school who can help with this piece. But ways that families can really support, the use of technology is bringing in to say like, I know you just finished this whole unit where you were making movies. Like, can we make a movie now? Like, can you make an invitation for the barbecue we're having next week for your brother's birthday? Like, that would be wonderful. So, like, providing authentic opportunities for them to apply what they've learned, especially from a creativity standpoint, and you can build upon what a student has learned how to use. Like, you might not need to know how to use iMovie, but if your child just finished a big iMovie project, like ask them to make a movie about something, right? Or to kick off, grandma's 75th birthday party, like, or something that's going to really leverage the skills that they've built, even if it's not content specific, but it's a great way to help extend an experience and help them apply what they've learned in a different context. That would be one big thing. If you're looking for extending an activity, like your child came home and said like, oh, we listened to a podcast today, like, can we listen to podcasts in the car, and you're not sure where to start with that, like that's when you might reach out to a teacher and ask for a recommendation. Like, my child
Sure.
loved that you guys listen to podcasts in listening stations this week. Like, do you have some other kid friendly recommendations that might be good for us for our next long car trip, right? Or something like that. So those are the kind of things that I would stay on the lookout for, but then also, feel comfortable asking and saying like, we just renewed our Hulu subscription. Like, are there any fun social studies topics that you're working on? Because we'd like to look for some movies that are taking place during that time period, right? And that we're going to watch them together as a family. So it doesn't need to be like learning something new from a family perspective or even buying new things, like just leaning into what resources you already have available, but looking for connections. Or, we don't know what we don't know. So asking like, is there something great on Netflix I can watch with my child this weekend? Oh, you're reading fantasy books as your next genre? Awesome. I will go look for a movie that falls into that category. So those kind of
Yeah.
little things can pack a really big punch.
Yeah, and I love that. We did that similarly. My daughter was reading Fault in Our Stars in school. And so I'm like, oh, okay, once you're done, let's go ahead and watch Fault in Our Stars. And
Mhm.
then, like, same thing with, they're talking about the American Revolution. Like, hey, let's sit down and watch Hamilton. I will take
Mhm.
any excuse to watch Hamilton. So,
Yeah, there's a lot of really, great connections. And one of the things that, I think is, almost, trumps any of these other pieces is that you're modeling lifelong learning behaviors for kids when you're doing these activities, right? Like you're saying that there's value here, that, the learning doesn't end, like, or you're making connections back to other things. And you're just showing that, genuine curiosity to learn about the world around you.
yeah, that's great. I love that. Um, so what should parents be asking their kids' teachers about the technology use in the classroom?
Yeah, so I would ask them, how are you using different types of media in the classroom? Maybe do you have a recommendation for a great YouTube channel that we can watch at home? I would ask them about, what kind of, I don't want to say data in terms of the way we sometimes think about data privacy, but in this case, I mean more like formative assessment data. Like, is there a way for me to track, or is there a portal I can log into, right, to see any growth or any areas of concern? That's especially important if you're working with, say, a tutor, or you have other supplemental support for your child outside of the classroom, right? So to bring that pathway together. So I would ask them about those pieces, just to get a feel for what technology use looks like. If you're participating like in a family night or meet the teacher, you might bring that question to the table to say, like, what kind of apps or websites are you using this year? Or are kids going to be creating with technology? Because my child's really excited about ebooks. They love reading them, and I would love for them to make an ebook this year, right? So I would
Sure.
say bringing those kind of questions and connecting them to things you've observed in the past, coming with that mindset to say, like, this is an asset. Like, if we use it correctly, it's an asset, as opposed to coming in from kind of that like deficit model. Doesn't mean that we can't be worried and concerned, right? But I think that if we
Yeah.
come into those conversations saying, like, I see this kind of value with my child, like, is that going to be something that is being spent, the time is being spent on this school year?
Yeah, so way less, like, accusatory, like,
Mhm.
"What are you gonna be just on Chromebooks all day long?"
Right, right.
Instead of the other way. Yeah, I like
Yeah,
that.
and I think that, is really helpful to, bring everyone to a conversation from a place of like, we're all on the same page here, right? I can be
Right.
worried, I can be concerned, I could have seen something last year that I didn't agree with, doesn't necessarily mean it's happening here. And just like certain big things like homework, right? Or scheduling, sometimes things are out of a classroom teacher's control. Like they're being asked to do this type of reading quizzing that maybe they don't think is the best use of everyone's time, but it's not their decision. So sometimes knowing that, and sometimes, they may not communicate that clearly, that it is kind of above their, above their head in terms of that decision. So understanding that sometimes those are pieces of it too, that there may be a district initiative that says every kid needs to use this for 20 minutes every day. Like that's a real thing that
Yeah.
happens. And sometimes it's great, right? And it's a great initiative for everyone, but sometimes it's not great. And many times that sort of piece is not within a teacher's control either. So understanding
Right.
just the different roles of different members within an institution, I think can be really helpful to make sure that when you're asking for something or wondering about something, that you are talking to the right person also,
Yeah.
because sometimes it's not that person's decision, right? That something is being used in a certain way.
Yeah, no, I that totally makes sense. Um, so piggybacking on that, excuse me, I'm like, I need to drink too.
Mhm.
Um, because a lot of parents don't understand that, like, if my kid is using Canvas, as part of their classroom, there's a parent login for Canvas where I can keep track of their schoolwork. And a lot
Mhm.
of parents don't even know that that's something that they can do. So, talking to the teachers, like, oh, is there a Canvas login that I can do? Like, how do I get added to that and everything like that?
Yeah, and a lot of times that's that's communicated early on in the school year when a lot of things are going on, and
Right.
it's one of many emails that came
Yeah.
through, right? Or if we don't know that it's going to come through and all of a sudden I get an email for my parent family login, I'm like, I don't know what Canva is. Like, I don't have a login for this, right? Like,
Right, right.
and so those are things that can get in the way, even again, when there's the best intentions from the school. So if you are not being able to monitor or access or get connected, more likely than not, there is that opportunity. It either just hasn't been communicated super clearly or frequently enough, or the value wasn't really part of the proposition when it was introduced. So it may have been easy to dismiss at first, but now is going
Right.
to be something that's a lot more useful. So absolutely contact teacher, school building to say, like, can I get into this? Or I don't have a parent login, but one of my friends does, like, and getting into that sooner than later. Many schools have adopted a learning management system like Canvas where you can connect and see. And it's something too that all of a sudden we can blink and we're halfway through August, right? Like
Right.
you as a family member, right, might make an appointment on your personal calendar that says once a week, right? I've blocked out that 10 minutes to just peek inside of there, right? That way
Right,
there's
right.
no surprises. Or if I have questions, because sometimes those spaces are not always friendly for someone who's not in it every day. And I
Yeah.
know, I think we're all guilty of this, right? Like if we're using something all the time, it can take us a minute to remember that someone who doesn't use it all the time, like, can easily get confused. And so you might have a busy teacher who, it takes them a second to say, like, oh, right, like you might not realize where this is because you don't use this every day. Like it
Right.
actually did take me a month to get into a routine here. How can I expect you to know where everything is when you go in every 10 minutes once a week, 10 minutes once a week or whatever you put on your calendar? So
Yeah.
more often than not, especially for larger schools or schools that have made a big commitment to a learning management system, they might have a help page on their district or school site that shows you how to reset your password or what to look for within those spaces. I don't want to put, total, responsibility on a family member to go search for YouTube tutorials on how to do everything.
Right.
But we know that can be a quick problem solve if someone hasn't answered our email quick enough for us, right? But many schools do have resources that are family facing, specifically made for families. And you'll find it on a homepage or on a landing page because they do want you to go look at all these things, right? They want it to be easy for you, and they want to make sure that you're able to get that information.
Yeah, that great advice. I love that. So, with the homework being done on technology through Canvas more and more, how can parents help their kids stay on task on these devices? I mean, you hear these horror stories of like everybody in the classroom, like just watching YouTube or whatever, or
Mhm.
even at home, you have to be on your device because you're doing your homework, but you're not doing your homework.
Right, and the same thing, we again, to make that, low tech or no tech connection, right? You might have your own child with a book that they love, right, hidden behind the book they're
Yeah.
supposed to be reading, right? Or
Right.
those kind of things, that might have happened. Or you walk in the room and the Legos go away, right? Or that kind
Right.
of thing, right? So these are all the time problems that are amplified. So I don't want to say
Right.
that it's the same because it's not. I think they're
Yeah.
amplified, right? Or they're dialed up a little bit,
Sure.
but they're not totally novel problems.
Right.
So what I would suggest is introducing routines, where we are working on this for short bursts of time. I do not think it is, reasonable to ask a child of any school age, right, to sit for an hour in front of their device uninterrupted to do anything, right? And so you
Totally
might,
agree.
as a family, say, like, we use this app, like, and this is our timer app, and we just want to do 20 minutes of focus, and then we're going to go get a snack for 10 minutes, or we're going to go run around outside the house or go down the block or whatever it is, right? And so there's a lot of tools that can help that. Yes, there are some that will like lock down the screen like you're talking about,
Sure.
and some schools do use that just to help monitor, make sure kids are on task in different ways. So you may not have that at home. Even if a student
Right.
has that in a school setting, your child at home might not have You might not have that ability. So you might decide to check out an app like Forest, like a forest, right? But Forest.
Like
It's,
tree.
yeah,
Yeah.
like trees, yeah. And so it's great because you can set a timer and you'll watch the tree grow. And if you move off of your phone, it'll start from like the tree doesn't grow anymore. Like you start from
Oh,
scratch,
nice.
right? So even just having that visual might be helpful, like the 20, 15-minute blocks, right? You're building that stamina, especially coming off of summertime. There's other tools like Brain FM. They have a great, like ambient noise style, lots of different options to choose from. Again, putting on the timer with that so that it starts and it stops.
Right.
Forest you can use for free. Brain FM, I think, has a freemium model, but you can
Cool.
also find a playlist on Spotify or a YouTube video that has a set amount of time that's going to play some ambient noise in the background. Not everyone loves that, but a lot of people do. And
Yeah.
that can help really set the routine. And you might find that if it's especially a struggle and you have the luxury to be able to do this, right? If you are in a position where you can sit and read, during that 20 minutes next to a child who's working on something, like I'm not talking to you
Sure.
either. Like I'm busy and like I'm
Right.
working on this, right? Like, and I don't mean it has to necessarily be a work from home, but it's like I'm working on this
Right.
project or I'm building out, right, our meal plan for the week, right, on our, on this platform, right? So just having that almost co-working time, at least,
Right.
if even if you can commit to that for the first 20 minutes, right? Or the second 20 minutes, which might be
Right.
harder, or
Right.
for the first couple weeks of school, and just being part of that routine. Again, definitely a luxury when we think about time and family and work balance and all of those pieces. But if you are in a situation where you can say, like, this is what we're doing right now, like all of us, like my phone is also in that basket, right? And the
Right.
other corner of the room, which is a really hard thing
Yeah,
for someone of any age to do, right? And when
for
we
sure.
feel that pain, right, we can acknowledge that that's painful for a teenager also, but we're in it with them. Like we really have to be
Right.
committed to some of these practices if we want them to stick. And the modeling piece is really huge.
I totally agree with that. I think, modeling exactly the behavior you're expecting to see is really, effective for the kids and they can, see, oh, okay, like it's not just me. It's not do as I say, not as I do,
Right.
we're in this together. So yeah, I really like that. Well, one other just recommendation I can think of off the top of my head is maybe just put if you can, have a specific spot where they do homework that's
Yeah.
like maybe not necessarily in their bedroom. If it is in their bedroom, it's like a desk, you
Yeah.
know, where like, okay, when I'm sitting here, this is my homework time, and maybe helps them get more into that mindset.
Yeah. And, if there is that dedicated space, right, that's fantastic. If it's changing up a space for that time, right, like we change the lighting in here, or this is where we do this, right, or something that's going to signal that this is like a different way to use this space, especially if we are in a lot of shared space or things may be a little bit noisy in different spots, right? That can be something to consider as well.
Yeah. I actually really like the changing the lighting because I have Philips Hue light bulbs where I can kind of put like different moods
Mhm.
together and things like that. So that's a really fun idea to like, okay, when it's this lighting, this is homework time. So that's really fun.
Yeah.
Um, so let's talk about the other side of the coin. So for teachers, and I know you talk a lot to teachers, so I really appreciate you being able to let us know like kind of the parent side. But so what can teachers do to make sure parents are on board with the technology they're using?
I think transparency is really key and consistency. Those would be the two big things. So, transparency meaning, am I communicating what's going on? I don't want to make assumptions that every child's coming home and talking about everything or that every family is automatically asking about everything. So, being transparent, that could be weekly updates to say like here's how we use technology this week, or here's a great digital citizenship question to ask your child right this weekend. We've been talking a lot about being safe online. This would be a great thing to bring into a conversation. It could even be a recommended resource like during this week we've been studying polar bears. the National Geographic's YouTube channel is great for all things animals. You might want to take a look at this and choose a video to watch together as a family. So that idea of the transparency, just talking about the things, is huge. The next piece, which goes along with this being effective, is the consistency. Doesn't mean that we have to send a message home every day with the podcast recommendation, right?
Right.
It just means that there should be like, I'm going to stop checking for recommendations if they stop
Right.
coming, right?
Yeah.
So there needs to be some level of consistency. Like, just like if I don't get a newsletter on a Friday from an educator I follow, like I'm worried something happened to her because she's
Right.
so consistent, right? Or like
Yeah.
I, woke up this morning, I was like, oh, it's Friday. There's going to be a new episode of this podcast on my phone. And if there's not, I'm like, is something wrong with my phone?
Right.
Or are they
Yeah.
okay? Like, I guess maybe they're on vacation. Did I forget that? Right. Like, so we want to
Yeah.
build that behavior for families as teachers, that they know that there is this level of, right, like every Thursday, I'm going to get that update from the week, right? And as someone who's been in busy classrooms, in busy situations, like you want to set yourself up for success for that too. Like saying that you're going to do this every Monday afternoon or Friday afternoon is really tough. That's a hard commitment to make, right?
Right.
Unless you really set it up every Thursday and you just schedule it to be sent out on Fridays, right? Like
Right.
you need to know like what your threshold is, like what's attainable. I just had
Yeah.
this conversation earlier this week. I kicked off Brain Pops conference for summertime. And one of the things we talked about was this idea of, it's great to have like big, scary, aspirational goals. Like those are great, but you also want to have attainable goals, right? That you
Right.
can commit to and you can meet. And then we can like build upon that foundation. So it may not be attainable to send a message home every day or twice a week, but it may be to do every Wednesday or Tech Tuesdays, right? Or whatever it might feel good so that you can give that update and kind of keep everyone on board. And that's true about making, say, tech recommendations or being transparent about what we're doing, but also like if I really do want families to check in on formative assessment data so they have a sense of where we're at, like I need to make sure it's updated regularly, right? Like, so there's that.
Right.
Like you can't do all the things, but if there is something that you are committed to, you really want to have that level of consistency. It's the only way people are going to show up, right? If they have that level of expectation and you're building that behavior for people to go and check and take a look at different things.
Yeah, those are great points. I love the transparency. I've always, and I know I feel like parents get a bad rap, deservedly so, these days, where they're just, my kid would never do anything wrong and like just get on the teachers. And I feel bad for teachers, but I would love more transparency. I'm like, if you think my kid is not doing well, tell me, please,
Yeah.
or let's talk about like, is he being off task when you're in your tech time? I want to know about that. So that
Mhm.
transparency, I think, is really important, for parents, I think, so they can get a good handle on, okay, what do I need to work on at home with my kid?
Yeah, and just like you mentioned there, if there's something that you're concerned about, right, you want to make sure that you've communicated that clearly, right, to a teacher to say, like, because
Right.
they might not see that thing in the classroom, right? Or,
Yeah.
they might not think that you want to hear from them as frequently about something, right? So,
Right.
we all don't know what we don't know. So, right, from that family perspective, if there is something that you're concerned about or that you do want updates on, like it's not a pain, right? It's not noisy emails, right? Like I really am thinking about this thing, right?
Yeah.
Communicating that to a teacher to say like, this is really important to us at home. Like I would love to know more about what's happening. Like, is it reasonable for me to ask you to give us an update once a week on this? Like, do you think you would be able to do that? Like I can send you a reminder email and you can just reply to it, right? Like, so
Sure.
whatever it is, like I think so many of these things fall into the we don't know what we don't know, and
Yeah.
we want to set up everyone for success, right? And we can't do both of those things unless we are super transparent.
Yeah. That's great. So again, for teachers, what technology should they be looking into if they haven't come across it yet? Like, what are the like your gold standards? Like, oh my gosh, everybody should be using this, everybody should be using that.
Well, a lot of schools have made decisions around tools for your learning management system and even tools for formative assessment. So lean into those. The next piece that I would say to look out for really fall into that consumption category and the creation category. So we've talked a little bit about things kids can consume. Yeah, we'd say like watch a YouTube video, but on YouTube, there's really great high quality creators like TED Ed and their animated, right? Yeah, absolutely, right? Like TED Ed animated explainer videos. Like if you are used to watching Khan Academy, like let's switch it up and watch something that explains something a little bit differently. Or you might, I've mentioned a few times podcasts today, like you might say, you know what, on reflection, we do a lot of short articles, we do a lot of short videos. Maybe I want to find audio that also has a transcript and share that with students and see how it works for them. So I would say the consumption piece, looking creatively at some of the ways that kids are consuming and being reflective of what resources might be getting a lot of love and which ones are not. And then the other area would be what I call open-ended creation tools, like a blank canvas. Like you can use this tool to do all sorts of things. And as a teacher, it's great to have in your tool belt because you can revisit it multiple times for different projects or even across different subject areas, depending on what you're teaching. So there's a few that fall into this category. Book Creator is one. I've done some work with their team. I did a back to school webinar with them yesterday that I think is up on YouTube already.
Oh, great.
Another
I'll
one,
put a link in the
yeah,
description as soon as this is done.
they're great and you can try that out for free and you can use it for free, like up to a pretty good point. Adobe Express is another one. I've done some work with them. You may be familiar, or listeners may be familiar with them as Adobe Spark, and then they've changed their name.
Right.
And so Adobe Express is great, totally free for schools. And depending on how you're accessing it as a teacher, you can, have your whole district set it up and deploy it for free, or you can access it for free with like some Google integration. There's some new Google Classroom integration there too. I'd also put in that open-ended category Flip, or what was called Flipgrid. So now it's called Microsoft Flip. That's one where, yeah, kids can do like video exit tickets. I think that's how it's most popularly used, but they've got some really powerful, green screen style technology. Kids can make short videos on anything. So it's become much more of a creation platform than, say, a video assessment platform. And that's another one that I would, especially now what they've done, the rebrand and the name change, it's just Microsoft Flip. And I would encourage people to take a look at that one too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Is there anything else that we've missed that you want to make sure parents or teachers like know about before we close?
Well, I would just say that if families listening in today are really interested in what is possible in a classroom, what's happening in a classroom, I share lots of resources on the blog that I'm not encouraging you to forward everyone to every teacher that you know, but it might,
Yeah.
just pique your interest or help you understand a little bit of what's possible with classroom technology. And I've also had some really interesting conversations on my podcast about digital citizenship and media literacy, topics that I know your audience would really be interested in, and that might be
Sure.
something worth taking a look at too. But I love this conversation. I so appreciate you bringing me in to chat about this, Sarah. It's definitely something that's near and dear to my heart.
Awesome. Yeah, great conversation. I feel more prepared for back to school next week. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
We'll go ahead and close it. And it looks like Tina Nguyen, you have won the giveaway. If you want to just email me at sarah@familytech.biz, I will send you that $25 gift card. So thank you so much for showing up live. And then that should do it for us. So thank you for watching. If you have any questions for Monica or for me, go ahead and leave it in the comments. We might not get to them. So, reach out to her on her website or, she's at Class Tech Tips on
Mhm.
Instagram. I saw, I'm at Family Tech on Instagram as well. So you can reach out to us there as well. So thank you again, Monica. It was wonderful to talk to you today.
Yeah, have a great one.
Thank you.